Hello there, and welcome to everyone joining us for today's webinar. I'm Clive Maxfield. Everyone calls me Max. In addition to being a practicing engineer, I also act as a technology consultant, author, speaker, and educator. As the host of webinars here on IoT Central, it is my very great pleasure to introduce an interesting presentation from one of our community partners. So, let's get started.
Thank you for joining us today for Parks Associates webinar, Eliminating EV Barriers, Future-Proofing the Experience, sponsored by Particle. We're talking today about what's happening in the world of EVs and charging stations. There is so much to talk about, and the focus really is on technology and innovation. We want to thank Particle for being our sponsor of this event. My name is Elizabeth Parks. I'm the president and CMO of Parks Associates. We are a market research and consulting company, and since 1986, we've produced thousands of research studies on emerging technologies. The data I'm going to share today is from our quarterly survey work of 10,000 internet households and is nationally representative of the US market. Our agenda is really to talk about the role of energy and IoT, current household adoption of electric vehicles, and how real range anxiety is, the necessary infrastructure requirements for EVs, the role of funding, public and private partnerships, and finally, metrics for success. I'm so excited to welcome Daniel Elizalde and Patty Gogan to join us today. Daniel has a long career in technology and has held various leadership positions, including being a VP at Ericsson and an instructor at Stanford University. Daniel has also just recently published a book, The B2B Innovators Map, where he's sharing his insights from his experience on the role of innovation in the digital world we live in. I also want to welcome Patty Gogan, who oversees international interests for Particle's smart energy business, and specifically is working to provide connectivity solutions for the necessary infrastructure to support the growing demand of electric vehicles. We're going to be taking questions throughout the webinar, so please add them in the Q&A box. But to start, though, I want to provide a little bit of background information to set the stage for our conversation, pulling from Parks Associates' Library of Research. So let's start, and when we talk about the fourth industrial revolution, we really mean we have entered a new phase of living where connectivity is a driving force in all of business and consumers' lives. The convergence occurring in integration of hardware and software, enabling new experiences, is driving demand for advanced technologies really to bring it all together. So part of what we're going to talk about today and some of Daniel's expertise is in the role of the platform for these converging markets and the speed of go-to-market strategies with new solutions. I want to start, though, and set the stage in understanding where we are with EV adoption in the United States. Currently, household adoption of electric vehicles is at 6 to 7% of all internet households. To put this in context, 1% of internet households is about 1 million households in the United States. So 6 to 7% is 6 to 7 million households with at least one electric vehicle. We will also have been seeing a continued rise in purchase intentions, which also goes along with a rise in familiarity of these new cars. All of these factors are combining strong tailwinds in the industry and a growing need to support the charging infrastructure. While interest and demand for EVs is growing, consumers still have a lot of range anxiety. Manufacturers are working hard to address this issue with new vehicles that travel longer distances. And ultimately, this will come down to the question of whether consumers are comfortable enough with the ability to charge their vehicles. This view here is from the US government-funded National Renewable Energy Laboratory, reporting a fast increase in charging locations around the United States. While these are encouraging trends, it's important to note that the goal is to have 500,000 charging stations across the US. We're seeing a lot of different growth in partnerships and clever locations of charging ports and stations that could help improve the perception of how long the charging process takes. So charging while you're shopping, while you're eating, while you're running errands, charging at work, which helps facilitate longer commutes, and charging at home, where it means you always have a fully charged vehicle, is of growing importance. We see mid-tier level 2 chargers growing fast and super fast DC chargers at an even faster rate. However, EV owners are still obliged to find charging stations that are compatible with their vehicles. This will be a continued point of friction that some consumers may not tolerate. The reason why we need to have these charging stations is because if you look at the usage of charging by consumers and the expectations they have of where they can charge their cars, there's still a huge demand for charging at work, while you're running errands, having a gas station, which is where people are used to getting gas for their cars, or just being able to charge wherever they want, and continue operating in a normal way like they've been accustomed to. This last piece of research shows from our data that 66% of consumers want a charging station within 20 miles or less, and almost 40% want a charging station within 5 miles or less of their homes. So there is a lot of work out here to build this infrastructure and to also meet consumer expectations and demands. So to wrap this up, we really are in the early stages of this huge transformation in the energy industry. And the foundation of all of it is based on the intelligence within hardware, software, the integration, the services, and the analytics. A lot is going to happen that advances the ability to integrate products together and move things from being connected to being very intelligent. This is happening in the energy and mobility industries, creating dramatic changes. And this is what we're going to be talking about today in our conversation. But with that being said, I would like to go ahead and introduce Patty Gogan, who is going to share a little more about this, along with his experiences and the work he is doing at Particle in the US and internationally. So Patty, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to keep control of the slides, but let's go ahead and have you do an introduction, and thank you again for bringing this important topic forward to discuss today.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. That's a superb overview, and I think it sets us up for quite a exciting conversation today. And those who are listening and tuned in, thanks so much. And by way of introduction for myself, and I think you've done a good job of that, so I don't need to double up on that for the audience, but Particle as an organization, to introduce who we are and why it makes sense that we're here, that is important. And we are a 10-year-old company, IoT platform as a service. We are the leading IoT platform as a service based out of San Francisco. So we've been going for some time now, and we're serving customers of all shapes and sizes, right? And the reason why we're here today, and I suppose topically, is the customers that we serve who are inspiring and driving the global energy transition in mobility, and figuring out and working out how technology plays such an integral role towards changing and moving towards electrified mobility. And I'll be able to share some examples of that. And the slide that you just brought up there really touches on the innovation side of things. And that's a big topic for today, I think. There's kind of three dimensions we see when we talk to customers in the EV infrastructure space and the energy space, and it really is regulation, consumer behavior, and technology, and the role in which innovation has in technology to support the ever-changing infrastructure that will support us to change towards more effective and electrified mobility. So we as an organization, we actually exist to enable organizations to be experts at their core competencies. And if your core competency is being an EV charging manufacturer or an energy infrastructure provider, it's really important you have the correct technology partners in place to scale and be pretty agile in ever-changing times, which I think we'll all agree on, right? We're very much in one of those now. So we're excited to be at the heart of the way people move. We're changing the way people move fundamentally. And on the next slide, I'll briefly sort of touch upon why it's really good for us to be here, but this event specifically. And as an organization, we focus on 3 key verticals. It's the way we list them. And smart energy, you'll see there on the right, is a key vertical of ours, and that's a responsibility of mine across Europe and beyond, and really figuring out how we can go and help people who are in the energy market, disrupting the energy market to change for the better, and specifically EV charging, EV infrastructure, everything that supports that ecosystem. We are inherently invested in that. And we will play a big part in our current customers who sit there, but also advising and figuring out how we can help more organizations drive the change that we're also desperately after. And on the next slide, you'll see I've highlighted just a few things here, which are kind of reasons why organizations would maybe look towards technology, but also technology which is future-proofed. And that's really important because I previously mentioned, consumer behavior, and Elizabeth, you touched on it there, right? We may be charging when we're going shopping, when we're, at home, wherever we are. Having reliable and ever-changing infrastructure is going to be difficult to manage, and technology will be at the heart of that. And the organizations who can look to adopt technology as a core dimension of that project, of that plan, and being sustainable, there will be advantages that come with that. I think we're all probably in agreement, right, that there will be winners and losers in this change, in this big wave that's coming, this fourth industrial revolution, however you want to label it. And there are opportunities here in companies who take technology to create a more reliable energy infrastructure, which is exactly, for me, number one, and I think for our customers, number one, and for you guys, number one, because if we are not customer centric, then why are we doing this? And then the second piece around differentiating your product and your market so you have an advantage there, but also enhancing your value proposition and making sure technology can continue to evolve that, so you're serving value to the market and customers. And then I suppose innovation is a buzzword, but really having technology in place for your infrastructure, especially in the EV market, it allows you to be agile, but it also allows you to create opportunities selfishly for your own businesses, to generate new revenue streams with data that otherwise you might not have. And you're only going to get that with, IoT solutions and this whole ecosystem surrounding it. So I hope that sheds some light on that piece. And on the next slide, I've just done, for those of you who are a bit more interested in the nitty gritty, and I won't talk into each piece, but this is our offering as a business, but this is not unusual. And there are lots of great players in the IoT space who also do part of this. And really, it's about looking at the technical ecosystem, which is to support sustainable infrastructure for this change in mobility, and that's going to come from having the right hardware, the connectivity, and the software, and having that ecosystem in place will support the transition. Right, doing this is very, very complex with many partners involved, and we like to think that we do a good job of it end to end, right? And that's not right for everyone, but just a little snippet there for those of you interested to sort of have a look at what's involved in a typical IoT project. And then the last slide, just some validation on work we've done and the space we've been in. Like I say, we're 10 years old, but everything's ever changing and we're always learning. So hopefully today we can bring some value to you guys listening, and we too walk away with something. So thanks for everyone joining. I'm really, really pleased to be here with you, Daniel, and yourself, Elizabeth, and looking forward to fielding some exciting and hopefully challenging questions as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Patty, so much for that overview of what Particle is working on. And these are the topics that we're going to be talking about today. Really understanding what do we mean when we say an IoT platform, and why does this matter for EV infrastructure? Also looking at the role of government funding, the charging experience for consumers, and really overall impact of partnerships and measures for success. We do also have Daniel with us today, and so I'd like to have him join us on camera, and welcome, Daniel. I would love to get an introduction of you, and also if you could share a little bit more about this new book you published. So congratulations to you on being a published author. We'd love to hear more about some of your career experience and specifically what you're talking about in your book.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Thank you for that warm introduction and for that great background. Patty, as well, a pleasure being here. Thank you for having me. In terms of background, as you mentioned, I'm a technology and product professional with over 20 years of experience in multiple industries, but my passion has always been climate change and how can we help accelerate that energy transition. some of my relevant background includes being a former head of products for STEM, which is a high growth energy storage company for virtual power plants on the smart grid. I had the opportunity to be a vice president, head of IoT for Ericsson, leading their innovation efforts for 5G and IoT. I also have the opportunity to teach at Stanford University IoT product management and strategy. Today, I work as an independent consultant for climate tech companies, helping them on their product strategy. And I'm a mentor in climate tech accelerators, Greentown Labs, and Third Derivative. So I'm very passionate about the intersection of climate innovation and technology specifically. And as a result of that, as you mentioned, I recently released my book, The B2B Innovators Map, which is a practical guide to go from your idea to your first 10 customers. And some of the interesting things about this book is that it's focused on B2B, which a lot of the energy transition is. And although the book is not specific on energy, it touches a lot of it because it's my experience. But the key point that why I wrote the book is everybody talks about we need to be more innovative and we need to innovate to solve these big problems. But when you actually start talking to companies, very few people know what that means or what are the steps that you need to do to actually innovate, right? You don't need to be Steve Jobs or Elon Musk, right? So there is an actual process that if you follow a process, you can reduce the risk and you can increase your chances of success. So the book outlines a 6-stage process to go from idea to early customers on a way to reduce that risk and also bringing your company along so you can keep the support of your executives while you're doing this uncertainty innovation.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing more about the topic of your book, and I'm really excited to read that. So we appreciate you joining us today. Let's go ahead and get into our discussion questions, and I want to start big here. And Daniel, I'm going to come to you with this first question on, what is the Internet of Things? This term is thrown around a lot, just like artificial intelligence and machine learning. These are buzzwords these days. So what are we talking about, and why does this matter when we're looking at energy and the infrastructure requirements for electric vehicles?
Of course, that is a great question that I get a lot. So what is it? Well, in reality, IoT is just an umbrella term that encompasses a myriad of technologies. If you boil it down to its essence, right, it's connected devices, so hardware and software devices that have sensors that can acquire data from the physical world. And then you can stream that data to a centralized location so that you can make both operational decisions and business decisions. So in essence, IoT is all about sensing the real world and having real-time access to data that can help you make decisions to drive your business. Now, this is very important for the energy transition. In fact, the Silicon Valley Bank in its latest report named IoT one of the most important technologies for the energy transition. And the way that we can think about it is that if you take a step back about the energy transition, which EVs is just a portion of it, it's all about moving away from fossil fuels. But if we look at the system that we have today, it was built in a very specific way. You have centralized power plants that generate electricity, push electricity in one direction, and it's consumed on the other side. To get away from all that, we have renewables that can be distributed energy resources, and we have, with EVs, the need to increase the capacity significantly. So you have all these very complex scenarios where you have to generate more electricity, orchestrate the flow of electricity, monitor your assets, so that in order to be able to orchestrate and manage all that, you need technology, as Patty was saying. The digitization of all these assets is what's going to make possible the innovation of new models and new solutions to solve these complex challenges. And that's where IoT comes into the picture. IoT is that bridge that links the physical world of these existing assets and brings it into the digital realm so that we can make all these decisions and innovate in all different ways, from operations to maintenance to new business models, etc. And so all this infrastructure, it's actually connected devices, right? The cars themselves, EVs themselves, are IoT devices, connected devices. The charging stations are IoT devices. The solar panels have that connectivity. The wind turbines, everything around the grid has it. So the more we're able to deploy these intelligent systems, the better we'll be able to optimize our system to create a seamless experience for the customer, which is ultimately what they want, is plug their car, there is power, right? And we can abstract everything else that happens behind the scenes with the application of technologies like Patty was talking about.
Well, yeah, and Patty, let's talk a little bit more about the platform and the role that it plays in this super complex environment. I mean, I don't know where it could get more complex. Maybe in healthcare, right? The healthcare market's super fragmented, very complicated, very highly regulated. The utilities and energy markets are very similar. So where does the platform come in here? And maybe some of the differentiating things that are necessary, particularly when you're talking about the speed of getting something done.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I suppose it could be attacked in two ways, really. And I think if I take it as what's the value of the platform, and why would you even look at something like that if you're a provider or manufacturer of infrastructure, right? In the case of EVs, is I think it's such an agile space, so having a single source of truth for your data is really, really important. And that's often really complex to build and manage yourself, because it's not what you're experts at, right? You may be an expert at building really good, reliable EV infrastructure or cars or whatever it is. But having a platform and having a trusted partner behind the scenes to make sure that as you scale in this market, you can get the data you need as frequently as you need it, in the ways you need to digest it, because there is loads and loads of data, and there's an argument that it's like the greatest currency we've got, right, in this revolution we're living in, which is the reality. But actually, it's only as good as the way you can digest it and make decisions on it. So having a platform that enables you to, absorb the data, so like the collection of the data, the processing of that data, and then action off of it. Having a platform is very important, because otherwise you've got all of these wonderful devices in the field, and they may be connected, but that's sort of like the use of that's good, so they're working and they're connected. But if you're not using that connection for value for either or mainly your customers, right, but then also your own businesses, what's the direction you're going in? So having a platform allows you to go and do that, and it will inherently, having a platform and a source of your data for your infrastructure allows you to innovate. And then it might be what you're collecting will drive the next decisions for your products for your customers. Inherently, that's what we see a lot, is customers in the EV space listen, or manufacturers in the EV space listen to their customers to drive their product innovation, and they do that by obtaining this data and all of this insight which they get from platforms that they have from their partners.
Well, and let's talk a little bit more about where this demand for EVs is coming from. We've talked a little bit about the consumer market, 6 to 7 million households in the US who have at least one vehicle. Many of them, I'm sure, have more than one. What about growth coming from the commercial sector? Is this a much larger group of vehicles on the roads, and is the fact that businesses are going to have fleets that are electric really also contributing to this need for infrastructure? So have we moved beyond consumer demand? Is the commercial world what's driving things in the first place, or is it the combination of these that we're now at this point in time where it's almost a tipping point, right? And we're seeing what's happening in California right now, right? They don't have enough electricity to power everybody, so much so that they might have rolling blackouts occurring across various cities. So, Patty, let me ask that to you on commercial growth versus consumer demand, and where where we are in this evolution of cars transitioning from gas to electric powered.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it's slightly different depending on where you are on the globe. So I'm here in Europe, and you guys are in the US. Slightly different, but ultimately it's a change which has to happen. Like there is no other option. It's from 2030 here in Europe, it's a mandate that no ICE, so no more combustion engines are allowed to be manufactured, and that's ultimately, if businesses don't move now, there is a curve, right, and people will overtake their competitors and people in the market if they don't move now. So from a commercial level, like I think the answer is it's probably level and will outweigh consumer demand, because the fleets will be larger and there will be encouragement from government, from bodies, also funding to go and be greener in the way you move. So companies will, and certainly here in Europe, are, you see it all the time. Companies who have to have, fleets of cars for whatever reasons, they are often EVs. And they will only continue to be. That's a good thing. It's a good step for businesses to go into. But again, there is still that gap where there is some reservation in, the certainty and the reliability and the access to infrastructure. So I think at the moment there's a seesaw, right? There's this balance of can businesses fully commit to going that way right now? I think they can in part, because the infrastructure certainly in Europe is good enough. But I think when that infrastructure is there and it's reliable and businesses can count on it, commercial will go way ahead of consumer demand. I think consumers have more of a choice and there are more factors involved.
Yeah, absolutely. And, maybe we can just touch on a little bit more on these differences, especially in Europe with what's going on with the energy markets. I mean, is there a big concern? I think I read that energy is going to cost like $3 trillion more next year for Europeans due to, some of the issues going on over there. So how does that, fall in place with EVs and charging infrastructure? Are there going to be problems with electricity and powering everything?
So in terms of in Europe, I know there's been, over the last 5 years, there's been a real growth in consumer purchases of EVs, which hasn't really been encouraged or driven by the government. And what they've seen, right, is if everyone keeps doing that, there's going to be real pressure on the grid, So now the incentives from regulation and government in Europe is all about how do we regulate and monitor infrastructure. So you may be familiar with the smart charging regulations that came out in a couple of months ago here in Europe and in the UK, and that was really to make sure that the government and the councils over here on our side of the pond have an idea and a grip of what is going to be demanded of the grid, so they can start managing that. And part of that will be cost. Right? I mean, I think we're in quite a unique period of time where there are lots of factors across the globe that are affecting, the price of energy. But I think, once we're through this wave with everything else going on, over in Ukraine and the likes, I think energy will be more of a sustainable solution. Right? It will be expensive in the interim, but no more expensive than oil and gas. People need to move at some point. So moving now will ready ourselves for what is the long-term future, I believe. But I think maybe you or Daniel maybe could touch on specifically the sides in the US. I know that Biden's pledge was more about actually just adoption. So the first phase, I'd say the adoption of it, as opposed to the management of what's already been adopted.
Sure. Daniel, do you want to have any comments on the regional differences here in Europe versus the US you'd like to share, and any other regions in the world? I was also reading China's got big moves with their population moving to EVs and perhaps having some struggles as well with their electricity.
Yes, for sure. China is right now one of the biggest players in this race for electrification, even though they still rely on coal a lot. But they are investing a lot of money in that transition, and their EV industry is growing. The US is actually making some really good advances recently with the Inflation Reduction Act that President Biden passed here. It gives a lot of budget for infrastructure for EVs and other areas that are going to support the grid. So the way I see it in the United States, there are some regions that are starting to have those mandates, like California recently passed a law to be able to say no more internal combustion engines after 2035, together with other incentives from the government to create that infrastructure. They're tackling from both sides. And I think it's really important, because those are forcing functions that will drive the industry to invest and will drive the costs down. Because one of the challenges with innovation is that if there is not a willing market to buy your products, it's a lot harder to bring the costs down. So if the government is able to take that initial risk and opens up a guaranteed market for all these companies doing that innovation, then the acceleration of bringing the costs down and laying down that infrastructure is going to be a lot faster. So it's really encouraging to see what's going on in California and in general in the US. Also because California has always been setting the pace for a lot of this ideal, so to speak, and about a third of the states in the United States follow what California does. And so there's a good chance that other states will mandate that, we don't have more combustion engines by 2035. The manufacturers themselves, of the automotive manufacturers, they didn't protest that. They're saying, yeah, we're moving towards that, right? So there's a big opportunity there. So I think that the market is starting to get ready. The incentives from the government and the states, the philosophy of people with EVs is starting to change. The costs are starting to be down. And there's also the benefits, as if I were to add to what Patty was saying about the fleets, there's actually a commercial benefit of operating an electric fleet versus internal combustion fleet, because the operations costs are lower, the energy cost compared to fuel is lower, and so there are actually economic incentives for you to move into this EV space. So I think we are at the tipping point, and we're going to see a lot of acceleration, and a lot of it is about scale that reduces costs, and that just snowballs more scale.
And do you know if there's any tax incentives specifically for commercial business if they move from ICE vehicles to EVs?
I am not sure, to be honest, on the commercial side. I know that for the private owned automotives, they extended the rebates that they had for tax. I'm not sure about the incentives for commercial, to be honest.
Yeah, that would be interesting. I'll have to look that one up. What about this, Daniel? Let me stick with you here on this next question on the state-by-state plans and these different views that the states have with adding the charging stations and then really going after the funding that's coming down from the government, applying for different funding. And it's also interesting, we're seeing this not only in the energy world, but the broadband infrastructure across the country has the largest investment in probably ever right now, and that might ever come down in terms of ensuring that rural communities have broadband availability and getting fiber out as much as possible. So a lot of investments that the government, federal government, is putting into the technology to future-proof. Of course, broadband is a critical component of the IoT, right? Because you have the data that has to be transferred. But I'd really like to understand more about these state-by-state plans. Obviously, California is in that leader position with some of the things that they're doing, but are there other states that you might call out in their approach that might be different or better, or anything you might share there?
Yeah, I think it's tricky because I think California has been the most progressive. New York has also always have a lot of great initiatives for electric vehicles and energy storage and changing the grid and having those laws. There are many other states that have a different political affiliations that might not be so inclined to do this kind of things. But we are seeing it everywhere, like even in Texas, which might be more Republican, and they have different fiscal philosophies. We're still seeing those deployments because they actually make financial sense, and there are the incentives of the government to do it. And to be honest, it has to work across the country because mobility is not restricted to the state. So you have to have that charging infrastructure. The other aspect that I'm seeing a lot is that change of philosophy of what charging really means, and you mentioned it in your brief. A lot of the investment is going towards retrofitting buildings and commercial facilities and homes so that you can charge at home. With electricity and electric cars, we changed the paradigm of having to go to a gas station to fuel. And so people need to get used to that. It's more like your cell phone that you plug in at night. But that brings an infrastructure challenge of being able to install those at home at a reasonable price. Many homes throughout the US don't have the cabling infrastructure to deal with a fast charger, so that's another challenge. And so I think that the multiple things that I touched on is the availability has to be across a country so that trips can happen. A lot of the focus has been on charging at home or at commercial, at work, as you mentioned. And the broadband part, I think, is very important. Without that connectivity, this whole idea of orchestration and smart asset management cannot exist. So having broadband, whether it's 5G or some other technologies, it's critical, because without that, the whole paradigm breaks. And so you have to move infrastructure in multiple angles: building infrastructure, charging station infrastructure, connectivity infrastructure. So it's a big overhaul. It's a big overhaul, and we're making progress, but it's a lot.
Well, and I've heard this a lot from people who have electric vehicles. It's really like a mind shift change. And so those consumer perceptions and built-in expectations we've had from gas vehicles, you know, that is going to be difficult to change. And so, Patty, let me go to you with the next question on understanding how we might be able to change this anxiety. I mean, is it all about the infrastructure in place in between consumers' homes? I mean, as we see more and more EVs getting onto the road, will the sheer volume of EVs help shift consumers to think, well, you know, if he got one, I could do it too. You know, what are the things that industry is doing to really shift that consumer perception?
Yes, it's a really good question, and I think that the cultural piece on the mindset is huge, right? And it's the same over here in Europe. It's probably, you know, of a similar scale there in the States, and that can't be controlled. That can be influenced. And I think you're right. You know, if you see your neighbor driving a Tesla, and you know, maybe he's of an older generation, you're thinking, hey, I should be doing that. I'm in my 30s, right? So there's a cultural thing of like adoption and change, and some people are more, you know, willing to do that than others, and I think that will just come, right? That when it's around you, you absorb it, and change will happen naturally. But we can influence it even more, and I think we have to. And it ultimately, the proof's in the pudding, in the sense of, can you get in your car and can you go on a journey for 250 miles and be sure that there is charging infrastructure if you need it, or longer? Can you do that? Charging at home is great, and if you need to go to the office or you need to go to the supermarket, great, that's okay, because you can just go at home and you can plug your charger in. You can control that, and human beings like that. They like control, they like certainty. And the big thing around EV charging infrastructure at the moment is uncertainty. Does it exist, and does it work? Because there's lots of it, especially here in Europe, you know, in supermarkets or shopping malls over there, and whatever it is. But does it work? So how do you know it works? And that, I believe, is where manufacturers and providers of the infrastructure have a responsibility to the consumer to say, you know, we will provide this infrastructure, and we'll be sure that it will work and you have access to it, and it's up. I think that's a really important piece. And once the snowball happens, as Daniel said, people follow. People do follow, and that's a big thing. And it is, you know, whenever you buy anything, if it doesn't work, you're reserved to do more of it. And given we have to go this way, we have to adopt electrified mobility, it's only right we do it properly once, and we don't have to backpedal on the infrastructure that's in place. Things will evolve, and that's okay, but let's be smart as providers to ensure that what we do put in place is agile and flexible and can change. And I think what we'll see over the next 5 to 10 years will be pretty extraordinary shift into the adoption, and yeah, I'm excited about it. I think it's there for us to take, and everyone has an opportunity in the market, consumers and providers.
Yeah, absolutely. Now what about who's going to end up paying for it? Let's talk about the charging infrastructure at the shopping center. You know, one piece of uncertainty or of certainty with a gas vehicle is you go to the gas station, you pump your gas, you pay for the gas, you just did a transaction, now you have gas in your car. With the EV, you go to a parking lot. Is the consumer now paying for their electricity? And if they're not, who is? And how's that going to work? Somebody's got to pay for that. So how's that work?
Yeah.
Daniel, do you have any comments on that one?
Yeah, I have a comment. I think I want to tie it back to what Patty was saying about changing the consumer mindset, because some of the interesting things that we're seeing, some of our auto manufacturers are starting to take advantage of innovation opportunities within the electric vehicles. They don't have to be the same, and they can appeal to the consumers in different ways. So for example, Ford, I think it's really interesting that their first production vehicles that they created were the Mustang and the F-150, which are their best sellers. And the F-150 actually has a lot of features for people that work on the field, or for people that are camping, that they can power things from the vehicle directly, or they can use the car to power their house in case of an outage. So there are all these benefits that you're starting to see from these cars that you couldn't get from an internal combustion engine that can help that distinction or that philosophy change, right? And so tied to that is the relationship that these cars and this transition will have to who pays for that electricity when you're out. And I think that's another great point where IoT is playing a big role, because I was reading an article recently on telematics and where utilities are starting to connect directly with the cars. And so you are not being charged, or you're not paying the infrastructure itself, you are tied to your account. So wherever you charge, the utility knows that you are the one charging, and therefore they charge to your consumer account. And so this model, so being innovative and figuring out how can we interact better with the consumer of that electricity, how we can leverage all these ideas that come from, let's say, having a smartphone in your pocket that can track a lot of your activity. Well, a car is just like that. It's a big battery and a smartphone on wheels. So what can you do with all that data, and can you create a better relationship from a monetization perspective, from a payment perspective, and from an overall experience perspective?
Yeah, those are really interesting points. And I mean, what we're talking about is moving people from doing something they've done this way and changing it to that way. And it's happening all over the place. We see it within the video industries, you know, watching cable television. Now everybody's doing OTT, right? 83% of households now have an over-the-top subscription like Netflix. So this shift in digital transformation across all industries really is happening, but it's going to take a lot to get the mass majority, you know, to move here with EVs, especially when we're talking about a purchase that is quite expensive, right? These are, any car is a major purchase for consumers. And so in thinking about, you know, how long it takes to charge, how fast it takes to charge, and somehow getting the charging stations more standardized, because, you know, that would be a real issue if I had an EV and I didn't know which charging station works with my vehicle. I mean, that would be a deterrent for me if that wasn't standardized. So Patty, do you see shifts in that area with technology, or will we continue to have some fragmentation over, you know, the speed of charging, or will everything just evolve and get better and faster, and that innovation cycle continue?
It's a great question, and I can answer it from experience that here in Europe, there is basically a huge opportunity. It's a greenfield opportunity for, I would say, software technology companies to partner with, and there are some great ones doing it already, especially out of Scandinavia, where they're probably ahead of the curve compared to everyone else. But there is an opportunity to say, hey, look, there is loads of infrastructure, and we know, is it fast charging? Is it usual charging? Does it work? Is it compatible? And there are companies who've gone, well, there is an opportunity to provide certainty and information to a consumer, and there are lots of apps that exist. So consumers can say, hey, look, I'm going to download this app, and within this geofence, within this region, I can see the type of charging available. You know, is it compatible for me? I'm not going to get there and have to turn around and have run out of range or anything like that, right? So there is a big opportunity. So I think the innovation piece is really important, that there are companies who are continuing to, and doing so well already, identifying the gaps, because we all have blind spots, and you know, we're developing and creating great infrastructure for EV users, and then there are companies, you know, like us, who do the connectivity, the hardware and software piece, but there are still blind spots for consumers, and unless there is an ecosystem which gives consumers options and is reliable, the adoption will be slower. So when we keep filling those gaps, consumers will be like, this is easier than we thought. And that it will get easier because there's opportunity for businesses to go and solve problems, and, you know, selfishly for those companies, you know, go and, you know, create great businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. Daniel, you have any comments on standardization of charging stations and anything you want to share there?
Yes, I mean, I guess the just looking at history of technology, most of the companies that start an innovation path and they have some foothold in the market usually want to push their own solutions. And so early on there's a lack of standardization on things, but then either there's regulation that forces that standardization, or there's a clear winner in the market that just makes standardization obvious. And I think we will get there, because it is not beneficial for the overall market to have this confusion, right? Yes, you can have a lot of the technology that can tell you where your specific charging compatible chargers are, or you can even reserve them and pay from your phone, etc. But ideally, if this is going to be the infrastructure we all use, ideally you should be able to stop anywhere and just charge, or at your house, or at your friend's house, or at a hotel. And so I think we will get there. And I think that as we move forward, standardization is also going to be an opportunity to lower down the costs, because then you can manufacture things at scale at a lower cost. Everybody's the same around the world. So I think we will get there. We're not there yet. It will be a while. So we're in the early adopting stages. So, but it's coming, I think.
Do you think the manufacturers recognize that need to standardize, assuming this is all going to really move mass market? I mean, 6-7% adoption is still very low overall. I mean, we could say 55% of households have a smart speaker, 88% of households have broadband, 74% have a router. So this 6% is still, you know, a very small number, and that increase, especially if it happens quickly, it seems like that's going to be a real critical point.
It has to be, and right now the automotive manufacturers, they're focused on reducing friction for the consumers, and there's different levels of friction, right? One is range anxiety, and can I charge easily, and that has to do with standardization of chargers and availability of chargers. And they are starting to partner with charging companies to bundle your car with the installation in your house to remove that. But that also, the other big piece of friction is price. And they go together, right? If things are more standard, people starting to get in more, drive scale, brings the price down, and it again snowballs. So they're definitely thinking about these things. I had conversations with them, but it's early, right?
Okay, great. Well, let's turn the conversation, talk a little bit about metrics and understanding specifically for charging stations. You know, these are large investments that are getting made. So how is a company going to understand success? What's the data that they're looking to draw from in terms of utilization, charging sessions, you know, the overall sustainability of that particular station, and then of course the money, right? This is a business, and all of this has to make sense in the end as it relates to money. So Patty, do you want to start with that question? So asking about key metrics to evaluate the success of a charging station.
Yeah, I can do. And I think it depends what phase we're in, and I think we've all agreed, and there might be some people in the audience who disagree, which I welcome, right? And I think great if we do. We're not in adoption, but I think we're still firmly in adoption, right, of the infrastructure. And initially it's getting the key data that I think we need to get is like, how long are people charging for? Who is charging? When are they charging? Because when we get this data, it will allow us to standardize, one, the infrastructure that exists there at that particular charging station. And it also goes to the wider picture in supporting this big data pool to support the grid and the regulations and further drive what we need to do. Because we know at the moment, right, that whether you're in the US or you're in Europe, we need to transition to electrified mobility. But in 5 years' time, we might not need to be pushing that as much, but what we might need to be doing is pushing, okay, how do we standardize the charging stations because the infrastructure is tired or there's too much pressure on it. So I think right now it's about like, how long are people charging, who are they charging, and getting that data. And that comes from having decent technology to connect those products, right, and extract that data. That's the first piece. And it's a challenge. It is a real challenge because right now it's hard to argue why that's valuable, because people want to develop infrastructure, sell that as their business, create revenue off of that because they've got contracts with supermarkets or whatever it might be. But actually the long-term vision and where we see the leaders, especially in Scandinavia and Europe, the leaders in the infrastructure space and at these charging stations are those who are thinking, now we put these things in now and we get some basic data, and what that gives us is it gives us a platform to innovate, selfishly, like you rightly said, Elizabeth, our business and our revenue. We can monetize what data we're getting from those consumers. We can almost charge additional services for that data if we want to, right? It might be you want certain capabilities from those charging stations. So the first phase on adoption is like, who's charging, when are they charging? And then beyond that, if you can get more detailed charging data, then why not go and create revenue streams on that? If that's where we get to, right? And that's an afterthought, but it's a complex question. I'm glad you come to me for it, but I think it's an unknown at the moment. But getting some data right now is I think Daniel will agree, right, is the key bit, right? Not just providing hardware which becomes tired. It's like hardware which we can extract value from for our consumers and then for our own businesses for revenue.
Yep.
Sure. And we didn't talk about this in our prep call, but I'm curious, is there a life of a charging station? Like it lasts for 5 years or 10 years or forever? Do we know that yet? Like they break, they stop working?
Yeah, so I think, there's certainly a lifetime to all of these things, right? And it really depends where that charger is. We over here in London have a lot of the like lamppost charging stations, which inherently have a shorter lifetime because whether we're just poor drivers here in the UK, I don't know, but like they get damaged more often, or there's higher pedestrian footfall by the infrastructure. But then, charging in supermarkets is probably more restricted and hidden away, so it's more looked after. But I think there's a lifetime, right? And I don't know what that number looks like. Maybe Daniel, you might have something on that, but I would be surprised at the moment if we are producing quality infrastructure that can sit there for sort of north of 5 years. I'd be surprised, but if there is someone doing that, let's talk.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So ongoing investments, Daniel, would love to hear more from you on these metrics, as well as any comments you have there on how long a charging station might last for.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think that's part of the analysis that I usually do with my clients in terms of the business model of an IoT solution, considering a charging station being a connected solution. Because usually in the energy industry, you get contracts for infrastructure, and the lifetime of the device per contract is usually around 10 years. And some others that are more well established as like 30 years of the hardware itself. And so right now, I don't think we're there. Probably their lifetime is around, like you said, about 5 to 10 years. But I think that the interesting part here is that this is a different generation of infrastructure. The value of the infrastructure, of course, is to deliver energy, but also to deliver on the data collection that can help the utility, the grid, the owner of the infrastructure, the drivers, provide new opportunities for innovation and opportunities for revenue, etc. So when I work with companies in these types of models, the hardware infrastructure has to last, but really what people have to be thinking about is how are we going to keep up with the changes through the software? So they have to be designed in a way that you can update the software so that you can adjust with what the market is going to look like in 3 years, in 5 years. You don't really know what that is. You might need to add some new data points that you maybe have the sensors, but you're not activating them because you don't know what to do with them. In 3 years, opportunities come, you enable that through software. Maybe you're opening APIs so that you can sell the data to third parties, and that's an area of revenue, and all that is software configured. So when thinking about innovation and this complex IoT infrastructure devices, it's about meeting the requirements of the government for deployment and make sure that they don't break, of course. But really, the innovation and the opportunities for business is in the software that you can continue to test and validate and iterate on as you continue to move forward and provide value to your customers.
Sure. Okay, great. Those are great responses. I've got some questions from our audience. So let me go there and start here with this one. Patty, I'll go to you. What are your thoughts on minimum capacity to deliver to EV owners? Level 1, level 2, DCFC.
DC. Yeah, I mean, I've got mixed thoughts on that. Daniel, you might have deeper thoughts on that than I do, but I have mixed thoughts. I suppose I'd love to know where that question came from, but yeah, Daniel, have you got anything to add? It's probably a bit light for us from an IoT side.
Yeah, I without any data, just my experience and talking to a few companies, I think that there is a big need for infrastructure that is faster, but I think we're going to see a lot of this L1 plug into a normal plug in your house, and people get used to charging their cars at night, and they always walk, they drive out every morning with a fuel tank, with a full fuel tank. So it's not even fuel, right? With a full battery. So I think there's going to be a big transition to those, and then a lot of opportunity for that, because they require the least infrastructure, and it works pretty clearly. The growth of these other faster chargers, I think, are very important, but I am a little bit interested. I don't know if you have more data on, like, how will those pieces of infrastructure adapt to the rapid curves of batteries? I mean, are we gonna, like, maybe in 5 years we have different generation types of batteries, and that infrastructure it's overkill for what we need to do today. And so I think that for mass adoption, starting small and the L1 chargers at home, I think that's a really viable place to start.
Yeah.
Well, Daniel, I've got a follow-up question, I think very relevant to what you just said. There is a substantial increase in the cost of lithium from 7 to 9-fold. Are there options in development for batteries versus lithium? I don't know if that's something either of you might be able to answer.
Yeah, there are a lot of different ones, and the lithium market, of course, has dominated, but there's a lot of discussions right now about whether there is enough lithium, who controls the rare minerals that go into batteries. And I've actually seen some early breakthroughs from universities on fast charging batteries that don't require some of those minerals. So I think that as we get this adoption, it's faster, we're going to get new technologies of batteries that can last longer, that are cheaper, that are less aggressive on the environment to produce. So there are a lot of those things, and those that's really what's called hard tech, right? It's like the early stages of that kind of technology to get it out of the lab to be produced at scale. We're still years away. But if everything we're talking about here takes foot, and you have incentives from the government, adoption from the market, etc., then the investment in those companies that are delivering those next generation technologies grows. And I've seen them already. I've advised a couple of them. And then we're going to see new technologies in the market, because I still think that as prominent as the EV is today with the lithium battery, it might not be sustainable for long term if we really want to do a full transition. New technologies are going to have to come through in years to come, right? So.
Okay, great. Have another question here. In these standards, adding the ability to tell utility EVs are plugged in, the size of the battery, the state of charge, and the charge when they have energy surplus, solar and wind peaks. How is your solution supporting this? Does that make sense? So I think they're trying to understand the supporting role of giving the utility access, I guess, to all of this information that would help them, as well as the surplus that might come through with peak areas there with solar and wind. Yep. So, Patty, is that something you want to answer?
Yeah, I can jump in. I'm sure we can both add weight to this one, but I think it's a great question, and there is absolutely opportunity on both sides. Like, I think EV charging and what consumers are paying for and using should be bidirectional to the grid or to the providers, the energy providers, and whether there is an opportunity to, lock that energy up and use it when the bills are really high in your own home, great, or is it you're selling it back to the grid? Like, there are ways to do that. I mean, over here in Europe, energy companies do it now already, right? So you can almost have credit in that. So there are opportunities to be really, really creative in the way EV uses, if there is surplus of energy, how they then use that. And the data is going to be key to that, because if the energy provider doesn't know what that looks like, then you're as smart as what you've got. And the challenge will be, and it is a real challenge, is if you have connected devices, which is our speciality in connecting, whether it be a charger or infrastructure, it's who owns that data, where does it go? Because that is always quite contentious, right? For obvious reasons. So yeah, there's opportunity there, but it'll be complex because energy providers are almost like public sector in some senses, right, in the way they move and regulation, whereas some of these great EV manufacturing companies are scale-ups and startups by nature, so they're a lot more agile. So it's how do you work to bridge the gap between both their needs with that data to make sure that you as a consumer are getting the best experience, paying the lowest cost, and can continue to do so, I think.
Okay, great. I've got one more question, Daniel. Let me get this question in your. I'll let you take this one, and then you can add on to that last question too, if you have any comments.
I'm gonna forget.
80%. This is an important one because this is talking about some standards in the in-home space that's of great interest, I think, to our audience. So 80% of EV charging is done at home. The home load, DER, and grid supply management are using key common home area networking standards like Zigbee and Matter. What are you doing to support these types of standards for multiple vendor interoperability inside the home?
That's a great question. So here's the reality, right? And so I'm going to piggyback on the previous response from Patty, which is the system that is going to allow us to do this complex orchestration between the home and the car and the grid and the utilities. It's not one system. We might call it Internet of Things, right? It is a myriad of systems, and all of those can be powered with, for example, particles technology, right? And so each of the vendors and each of the developers of each of those systems will have their own way of interconnecting. And so there is a different layer above that where somebody, either the utilities or either some new providers, stitch along a lot of these different systems to provide aggregated value to control something like this, right? Right now, because everything is very nascent, even with IoT, the standards war is prevalent in a lot of different sectors. In the home, for example, we have a lot of different standards that don't work together. Zigbee is kind of on going down. Right now, we've seen Wi-Fi 6, and then cellular being the top connectivity standards. And so a lot of companies are supporting those. But the reality is that there will be a fragmented market because there are, like Patty said, developers of charging infrastructure that might choose their own technology for their own strategy, and then the home, different vendors. And if you are into the smart home, do you have the Google ecosystem or the Amazon ecosystem or the Apple ecosystem? They're all different. And so it's going to take, or it actually can bring a lot of opportunities for system integrators and these types of companies to stitch all those together to be able to provide a higher level visibility through all this data. And I don't see how we can get away from that. I've been, teaching at Stanford for years and years and years, and this is one of the main challenges about what standards to use and how do you build the ecosystem. In reality, it's a partnership ecosystem where you try to figure out who you work with together, and somebody has to stitch a lot of solutions together. I don't see a way around that for a while, especially worldwide.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think the industry is starting to really recognize that the reality of the smart home space is partnerships really are a requirement, and these large stakeholders are going to have to come and work together to provide this seamless experience that we've all envisioned in the smart home space. We have time for really just some final comments. I want to throw in this final question with your final comments, and so if you could both speak towards the future of EVs and infrastructure, and then let me throw this question out along with it if you'd like to answer. When do you see wireless charging for EVs coming to market? After all technologies eventually will go wireless. So Daniel, let's start out with you first, and Patty, we will wrap it up with your final comments.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you everybody for attending. Thank you, Patty and Elizabeth, for a great conversation and the opportunity to be here. In terms of where I see this adoption of this technology, I think it's going to continue to grow. We have not only a lot of interest and great technology already available, we have the regulation and the legal mandates to actually do so. So I think we're going to see it grow. But the takeaway I think from that I want you to have from this conversation is that the innovation aspect is not just on having charging stations that provide electricity, right? This is a network of potential IoT devices that can produce a lot of data that can help you spearhead all sorts of different offerings and business models and products. So it's all about how can we build this data layer on top of this infrastructure to continue to advance this energy transition. And there was another question there for, I guess for me, but a wireless charging. Yeah. I think that's still very early on. I mean, we barely can charge, I can't even charge my Apple Watch wirelessly overnight. So I think we'll eventually get there. That was, Nikola Tesla's dream. But I think we're not anywhere close.
Okay, great comments, Patty. The future of energy, EVs, the infrastructure. Any comments on wireless charging?
Yeah, well, I think look, it is the future. So we have to move towards an electrified world of mobility and changing the way we move. I believe actually it's just a huge area of opportunity, not just for for everyone, right? For consumer, for manufacturers, for software companies, for hardware companies, for regulators, for governments, because we have to go there and look, it's greenfield at the moment because we haven't done it before. So big opportunity. I believe there'll be lots of winners, there'll be some losers, and I think those who are moving and thinking now about putting solutions in which are agile and future proof by bringing in the right partners are the ones who will win, and we're seeing that. So I think if anyone takes anything away from this, and thank you all for joining, and Daniel, Elizabeth, having you here is great. There's opportunity, so think about that, and we are the people in the space seeing it, right, and happy to talk about it. And then wireless charging, it's an interesting one actually. I was at an event in Amsterdam in May called Fully Charged, which is very much focused on EVs and production of the infrastructure which supports that. And there's a big German outfit who actually bought a prototype of a wireless charger, and I got to reverse a car over it, and it was I think we're a way off. It was a beautiful product, but you have to be very precise and very accurate, and I think we'll get there. But look, let's not run before we can walk. Let's figure out the standardized infrastructure we produce, seeking value from that, and then making that repeatable across wireless and whatever else is to come.
Yeah, absolutely. So a little ways to go before we see wireless charging EVs. I want to thank you both for joining. I've learned so much throughout this conversation. Some of the things that really stuck out to me is that this infrastructure push is really beyond electric vehicles. This is really tapping into all of the energy infrastructure, whether it's in the US or in Europe or any other region. The role of innovation, data, connectivity, the complex orchestration with a myriad of systems. I love that, Daniel, that came from you. This is such an important topic, especially to educate the industry on. And so I want to thank you, Patty and Particle, for your support of this topic. We really enjoy working with your team, and Daniel also for your contribution. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at any of our Smart Energy Summit sessions in the future.